The stars looked the same as they always did, but Commander Zethus knew something the humans did not. His empire had conquered 17 star systems, and this 18th would fall just as easily as the others. The Vexari Empire did not ask permission. They took what they wanted. His fleet of 12 warships moved through the darkness of space, their hulls gleaming with the purple and silver colors of the Empire. Zethus sat in his command chair, watching the screens that showed the boundary ahead. The humans had placed warning beacons there, automated machines that broadcast messages in multiple languages. You are approaching sovereign human territory. State your business and await authorization. Unauthorized entry is considered an act of war. This is your only warning. Zethus laughed at the message. His intelligence report said the humans were new to space travel. They had only achieved faster-than-light flight about 60 years ago. They were children playing at being warriors. The Vexari had been traveling the stars for over 3,000 years. Ignore the warnings, Zethus ordered his navigation officer. Take us through. The fleet crossed the boundary without slowing down. Behind them, the warning beacons went silent for a moment, then began broadcasting a different message. This one was not a warning. It was an alert, sent through channels the Vexari could not detect, racing ahead of them at speeds faster than their ships could travel. 3 days away from the border on a small colony world called New Dakota, a man named Jake Morrison was checking his fields when his communication device started beeping urgently. Jake was a farmer, but like everyone on the colony worlds, he also served in the militia. It was required. The colonies were far from Earth and help could take weeks to arrive. He pulled the device from his belt and saw the red alert flashing on the screen. His hands went cold as he read the message. Unauthorized ships had crossed into human space. 12 of them. Military vessels. They were heading toward the inner colonies. Jake ran for his house, shouting for his family to get inside. His wife Lisa came running from the barn. Their daughter Sophie was already at the door, her face pale. She was 16 and old enough to understand what the alert meant. How many? Lisa asked. 12 ships, Jake said. Big ones. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with the hard look Jake had learned to recognize. She had been a soldier before they came to New Dakota. She knew what was coming. I need to get to the station, Jake said. You two get to the shelter. I'm coming with you, Lisa said. Sophie can manage the shelter protocols. Sophie nodded, already moving to the control panel on the wall. Jake wanted to argue, but there was no time. He and Lisa ran for their vehicle and headed toward Outpost Sentinel, the small defensive station that protected their sector of New Dakota. The station was already buzzing with activity when they arrived. 6 patrol craft sat on the landing pads and crews were loading weapons onto them. Jake recognized most of the faces. These were his neighbors, people he had shared meals with, people whose children played with Sophie. Lieutenant Amy Brooks met them at the entrance. She was young, only 25, but she had trained at the military academy on Earth before joining the Colonial Defense Force. Her face was serious but calm. Captain Morrison, she said, using his militia rank. We have confirmation. 12 Vexari warships are 4 hours out. They're not responding to hails. What do we have? Jake asked. 6 patrol craft, 8 armed civilian ships, and the station's defense grid. We've also got mining charges from the asteroid facility. Not exactly military grade, but they'll work. Jake looked at the numbers on the screen. 18 ships total, most of them small, against 12 warships from a species that had conquered 17 star systems. The math was not good. What about the fleet? Lisa asked. How long until they get here? Amy checked her console. Admiral Cross is mobilizing now. Best estimate is 36 hours. 36 hours. The Vexari would be here in 4. Jake made his decision. We can't let them reach the populated areas. We need to slow them down. Make them think twice about going deeper into our space. We can't fight 12 warships with what we have, one of the other militia officers said. We don't have to win, Jake said quietly. We just have to make them pay for every meter they take. The crews worked quickly. They had practiced for this, drilled for it. But practicing and doing were very different things. The patrol craft launched first, spreading out into a defensive formation. The civilian ships followed, modified freighters and mining vessels that now carried weapons instead of cargo. Jake took command of the lead patrol craft. Lisa sat beside him as his weapons officer. They had done this before, years ago, in a different war against pirates. But this was different. These were not raiders looking for easy profit. These were conquerors. The Vexari fleet appeared on their sensors right on schedule. 12 massive ships, each one 3 times the size of Jake's patrol craft. They came forward in a tight formation, confident and steady. Jake opened a channel to all his ships. Remember the plan. Hit and run. Use the asteroid field for cover. Make them chase us. Don't try to be heroes. We're buying time, that's all. The battle started when the Vexari fired first. Their weapons were powerful, beams of energy that could cut through metal like paper. One of the civilian ships took a direct hit and exploded instantly. Jake felt his stomach twist, but he pushed the feeling down. There would be time to grieve later. "All ships scatter," he ordered. The human ships broke formation, diving in different directions. Jake's craft headed straight for the asteroid field with 3 Vexari ships following. Behind him, he could hear Lisa working the weapons console, launching missiles and firing their plasma cannon. One missile hit a Vexari ship's shield and detonated. The shield held, but Jake saw it flicker. They could be hurt. "Amy," he called over the comm. "Take your group and set up the mines in Sector 7. We'll lead them through." "Roger that, Captain." The next 2 hours were chaos. Ships darted through the asteroids, weapons fire lighting up the darkness. 2 more human ships were destroyed, but they took 1 Vexari scout ship with them. The explosion was beautiful and terrible. Jake's ship took damage to the starboard engine, but they kept flying. Lisa managed to land a lucky shot on a Vexari cruiser, punching through a weak point in its armor. The ship didn't explode, but it fell back, trailing atmosphere. On the Vexari flagship, Commander Zethus watched the battle with growing confusion. These colonists were supposed to surrender or flee. Instead, they were fighting like cornered animals. One of the human ships had deliberately crashed into a Vexari destroyer, sacrificing itself to damage the larger vessel. "What kind of species does this?" his second officer asked. Zethus had no answer. In all his campaigns, he had never seen defenders throw themselves at his ships with such disregard for their own lives. It was insane. It was effective. "Push forward," he ordered. "We will crush them and move on to the main colonies." But even as he gave the order, Zethus felt something he had not felt in many years. Uncertainty. These humans were not fighting like primitives. They were fighting like they had done this before many times against enemies far more dangerous than the Vexari. Jake Morrison flew his damaged ship between 2 asteroids, Lisa beside him, and waited for the next attack. Behind them, the colony was safe for a few more hours. Ahead of them, the Vexari fleet regrouped. The message had been sent. The fleet was coming. Now they just had to survive long enough for help to arrive. Admiral Helen Cross stood in the command center on Earth, watching the reports come in from New Dakota. The screens showed the battle in real time, delayed by the light-speed communication lag. She watched Jake Morrison's small fleet fight against impossible odds, and she felt both pride and anger. Pride because they were holding. Anger because they had to hold it all. "How many did we lose?" she asked quietly. 5 ships so far, her aide replied. 3 civilian vessels and 2 patrol craft. But they damaged 2 Vexari ships and destroyed 1 scout. Helen nodded slowly. The math was still terrible, but Jake was doing what he needed to do. He was buying time. Now she had to make that time worth something. "Activate Protocol 7, she said. The room went silent for a moment. Protocol 7 was the emergency response plan, the one they had created after the Pirate Wars 30 years ago. It had never been fully activated before. Every officer in the room knew what it meant. "Confirmed," the communications officer said. "Activating Protocol 7 now." Across human space, every ship received the same message at the same instant. Military vessels went to full combat readiness. But more importantly, civilian ships received their orders too. Cargo freighters docked at the nearest stations and began their transformations. Panels opened to reveal weapon mounts. Cargo holds were emptied and filled with missiles. Peaceful merchant vessels became warships in a matter of hours. This was the secret the other species did not know about humanity. Every civilian ship was built with military conversion in mind. It had to be. Humanity had fought too many wars against itself to trust in permanent peace. They hoped for the best but always prepared for the worst. Captain Helen Cross had been a young lieutenant during the Pirate Wars. She had seen what happened when colonies were left defenseless. She had sworn then that it would never happen again. That was why Protocol 7 existed. That was why she had spent 20 years making sure humanity would never be caught unprepared. "How long until we can launch?" she asked. "The fleet is assembling at Rally Point Orion now. We'll have 200 ships ready in 12 hours. Another 100 will join us within 24 hours. Helen did the calculations in her head. Jake Morrison needed to hold for 36 hours total. He had already held for 4. 32 more hours. It was asking a lot, but she knew Jake. He would hold or die trying. "Send a message to Captain Morrison," she said. "Tell him help is coming. Tell him to hold the line." The message went out, traveling at faster than light speeds across the void. It would reach Jake in about 30 minutes. Helen hoped he would still be alive to receive it. She turned to her tactical officer. "I want every exit point from human space covered. The Vexari came in through one door, but there are 6 ways out. I want them all blocked." "You're not planning to intercept them at the colony?" the officer asked. "No," Helen said. "I'm planning to trap them. They came into our house uninvited. Now we're going to lock the doors." The officer smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Yes, Admiral." Back on New Dakota, Jake Morrison received the message. 32 more hours. His ship was barely flying, held together by emergency patches and prayers. Lisa had taken shrapnel to her arm but refused to leave her station. Around them, the remaining ships were in similar condition. "We can do this," Lisa said, reading his mind. "We have to," Jake replied. Lieutenant Amy Brooks called in on the comm. Her ship had lost its main engine and was running on thrusters only. "Captain, I have an idea. It's crazy, but it might work." "Tell me," Jake said. "The Vexari don't know our space. They're following their sensors and their charts. But we know every asteroid, every piece of debris. What if we use that?" Jake understood immediately. "You want to set up an ambush. More than that. I want to make them think we're retreating. Lead them into the deep asteroid field near the gas giant and then collapse the exit route. Trap them in a box. It was dangerous. If the timing was wrong, they would be trapped too. But it was better than just running until they ran out of fuel and ammunition." "Do it," Jake said. "Send me the coordinates." The next 6 hours were a deadly game of cat and mouse. The human ships fell back slowly, making it look like they were losing. The Vexari pressed forward, confident now. Commander Zethus saw the human resistance crumbling and ordered his fleet to pursue. "They're breaking," he told his officers. "Push them hard. We'll destroy them and be at the main colony by morning." But Jake Morrison was not breaking. He was leading. Every retreat was calculated, every apparent mistake was planned. The Vexari followed him deeper into the asteroid field, past the safe routes, into the areas where the asteroids were thick and unpredictable. Amy Brooks had positioned mining charges along the exit corridor. When Jake gave the signal, she detonated them all at once. Thousands of tons of rock exploded, filling the passage with debris. The Vexari fleet was suddenly boxed in, surrounded by asteroids on all sides and blocked from retreating. "Now!" Jake shouted. The human ships turned and attacked. They came from every direction at once, using the asteroids as cover. Missiles flew in swarms. Plasma fire lit up the darkness. The Vexari tried to return fire, but their big ships were not built for this kind of fighting. They needed space to maneuver, and they did not have it. Another human ship died, rammed by a Vexari destroyer in desperation, but the destroyer paid for it, taking critical damage that left it drifting and helpless. Commander Zethus finally understood. These humans had not been running. They had been hunting. The colonists had led him into a trap using nothing but damaged patrol boats and civilian freighters. It was brilliant and terrifying. "Pull back," he ordered. "Get us out of this field." But there was nowhere to go. Every direction led through deadly corridors of spinning rock. The Vexari fleet scattered, each ship trying to find its own way out. It was exactly what Jake wanted. The unified fleet was now a collection of isolated ships, and isolated ships could be picked off one by one. Jake checked his chronometer. 26 hours left. They could do this. On Earth, Admiral Helen Cross watched the tactical display as her fleet assembled. 300 ships now, with more joining every hour. The crews were a mix of military personnel and civilian volunteers. Merchant captains who had flown cargo for years were now commanding armed vessels. Factory workers who had built ships were now learning to fight them. Charles Wayne, the human diplomatic officer, stood beside her. He had been at a Galactic Council meeting when the alert came through. He had rushed back to Earth immediately. "The Council is demanding answers," Charles said. They want to know what we're going to do. We're going to teach a lesson, Helen replied. One that won't be forgotten. Some of them are calling for restraint. They say we should capture the Vexari and negotiate. Helen turned to look at him. Do you believe that? Charles was quiet for a moment. No. The Vexari crossed our border knowing exactly what they were doing. They ignored our warnings. If we show weakness now, others will test us too. That's what I thought, Helen said. She turned back to the display. We're not going to negotiate. We're going to make an example, and we're going to make sure every species in the galaxy watches what happens when you enter human space without permission. Her fleet was ready, 300 ships armed and waiting. The Vexari had brought 12. It was not going to be a fair fight. Helen had no intention of fighting fair. All ships, she broadcast. Jump in 5 minutes. Target rally point Orion. From there we proceed to New Dakota. Battle formation Delta. We're going to show them what happens when you wake up a sleeping giant. The fleet acknowledged. 300 captains, 300 crews, all ready to defend their home. Some were veterans who had fought in the pirate wars. Others were new recruits who had trained for this moment but never expected it to come. All of them understood what was at stake. Humanity had been peaceful for decades. They had traded with other species, shared technology, built diplomatic relationships. But peace was not the same as weakness. Humanity remembered its violent past. They had fought countless wars against each other, wars that had nearly destroyed their entire species. They had learned to make peace, but they had never forgotten how to make war. The Vexari were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Admiral Helen Cross gave the order, and 300 ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel, racing toward New Dakota. Jake Morrison and his tiny fleet had held the line for 10 hours. Now the cavalry was coming, and they were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to deliver a message written in fire and steel. Part 3. The line is drawn. The Vexari fleet was still trying to escape the asteroid field when Admiral Helen Cross arrived with 300 ships. Jake Morrison saw them appear on his sensors and felt something break loose in his chest. Relief, maybe. Or maybe just the release of tension he had been holding for 32 hours straight. They're here, he said quietly. Lisa squeezed his hand. They had both thought they might die in the asteroids, fighting until their ship fell apart around them. Now they might actually survive. But Admiral Cross did not come to save the colonists. She came to send a message. Her fleet did not engage the Vexari immediately. Instead, they spread out across the star system, moving to cover every possible exit route. Jake watched on his tactical display as human ships blocked the jump points, the hyperspace lanes, every path that led out of the system. The Vexari were no longer trying to conquer, they were trying to escape, and Admiral Cross was making sure they could not. Commander Zethis saw what was happening and felt fear for the first time in his military career. His 12 ships were scattered, damaged, and now surrounded by a force 25 times their size. He had walked into a trap, and the trap had just snapped shut. Attempt to hail them, he ordered. We need to negotiate. His communications officer worked frantically. They're receiving our signals, Commander, but they're not responding. On the Liberty's Hammer, Admiral Cross's flagship, the communications officer reported the Vexari attempts to make contact. Helen ignored them. She had something more important to do first. She opened a channel on every frequency that existed, broadcasting in the clear so that every ship in the sector could hear. Every listening post, every diplomatic station, every species monitoring human space would receive this message. This is Admiral Helen Cross of the United Human Space Command. 36 hours ago, a military fleet from the Vexari Empire crossed into sovereign human territory without authorization. They ignored our warnings. They attacked our colonies. They killed our people. We warned them that unauthorized entry would be considered an act of war. They chose not to believe us. She paused, letting her words travel across the void, knowing that within hours every government in the galaxy would be analyzing this transmission. Let this be a lesson to all who might test our resolve. Our boundaries are not suggestions. They are law. You were warned. You chose to violate our space. Now you will learn why no one enters human space uninvited unless they do not plan to come back. Commander Zethis heard the transmission and understood that there would be no negotiation. The humans were not interested in his surrender. They wanted something else. They wanted an example. All ships, he broadcast to his fleet. Fight to the last. Die with honor. But his ships were already dying. The human fleet attacked in waves. coordinated strikes that overwhelmed the Vexari defenses. And the weapons the humans used were unlike anything Zethus had seen before. Kinetic kill vehicles launched from human railguns, simple chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds. They hit with the force of nuclear weapons, punching through shields and armor like they were paper. Swarms of drones attacked in patterns that seemed almost alive, adapting to Vexari defensive fire. Electronic warfare packages turned Vexari targeting systems against themselves, making their own weapons fire at ghost targets. Jake Morrison watched from the safety of the asteroid field as one Vexari cruiser after another died. It was not a battle. It was an execution. The humans had learned to fight during thousands of years of warfare against each other. They had perfected the art of killing. Now they were showing the galaxy exactly what they could do. Lieutenant Amy Brooks sat in her damaged patrol craft, watching the same display. "Is this what we are?" she asked quietly. "Is this who humanity really is?" Jake understood her question. They had just spent 36 hours fighting for their lives, and now they were watching their own species destroy an enemy with cold, calculated efficiency. It was disturbing. It was also necessary. "We're survivors," he said. "We do what we have to do to protect our own." The battle lasted 3 hours. By the end, 11 Vexari ships were destroyed. The 12th, a heavy cruiser that had been Commander Zethus's flagship, was disabled but intact. Its engines were dead, its weapons offline, its shields collapsed. It drifted in space, helpless. Admiral Cross gave specific orders. "Board that ship. I want the crew taken alive. All of them." Her Marines moved in, cutting through the hull and securing the Vexari crew section by section. The Vexari fought back, but they were exhausted and outnumbered. Within an hour, every surviving Vexari was in custody. Commander Zethus was brought to the Liberty's hammer and restraints. He stood before Admiral Cross, defeated but still defiant. Through translation devices, they could understand each other perfectly. "You have won," Zethus said. "Kill us and be done with it." Helen studied him for a long moment. He was tall, taller than any human, with scales that shimmered in the ship's lights. He looked dangerous even in defeat, but he also looked tired. "I'm not going to kill you," Helen said. "I'm going to send you home." Zethus stared at her in confusion. "Why?" "Because you're going to deliver a message for me. You're going to tell your empire what happened here. You're going to tell them that humanity's warnings are not empty threats. You're going to tell them that our borders are absolute, and crossing them means death." She gestured to the screens that showed the debris field where the Vexari fleet had died. "Look at what remains of your fleet. 11 ships destroyed, thousands of your warriors dead, and we barely lost 20 ships doing it. Do you understand now? Do you understand what you walked into?" Zethus looked at the screens and felt something cold settle in his chest. He had thought humans were primitives, children playing at being warriors. He had been catastrophically wrong. "Your species," he said slowly. "You have fought wars like this before." "We've fought wars much worse than this," Helen said. "Against ourselves. For thousands of years. We nearly destroyed our own world multiple times. We learned to make peace, but we never forgot how to make war. That's what makes us dangerous. We know exactly what we're capable of, and we're willing to do it when necessary." She leaned forward. "Go home, Commander Zethus. Tell your empire what you saw here. Tell them that if they come back, if they bring 1,000 ships or 10,000 ships, we will be waiting, and we will destroy every single one of them. Tell them that human space is sovereign, and we will defend it with everything we have." Zethus wanted to argue, wanted to maintain his dignity, but he could not. He had lost completely and totally. More than that, he had learned something terrifying about this species. They were not cruel. They were not evil. They were simply determined, absolutely and ruthlessly determined to protect their own, and that made them more dangerous than any enemy he had ever faced. The Vexari crew was returned to their ship. Human engineers repaired it just enough to make the journey home, giving them fuel and supplies but leaving the weapons systems disabled. Then Admiral Cross did something that shocked even her own officers. She had the Vexari taken on a tour. For 3 days, the Vexari prisoners were transported through human space. They visited shipyards where dozens of new vessels were being built every month. They saw training facilities where human children, some no older than 10, practiced combat simulations. They visited museums that showed the history of human warfare, the countless conflicts that had nearly destroyed the species. Lieutenant Corvus, Zethus's second officer, was the one who understood first. He stood in a museum looking at displays about the old nuclear wars, the conflicts that had killed billions. He saw weapons that could crack planets, diseases engineered to kill, machines built solely for destruction. They showed this to us on purpose, he said to Zethus. They want us to understand what we're dealing with. I understand, Zethus replied. These humans, they are not builders who learn to fight. They are fighters who learn to build. War is in their blood. On Earth, Charles Wayne stood before the Galactic Council and gave his report. The council chamber was full of representatives from dozens of species, many of them angry or afraid. Some called humanity's response excessive. Others called it barbaric. Charles listened to their complaints and their fears, and then he spoke. We posted clear warnings at our borders. We established rules that every species received and acknowledged. We gave the Vexari every opportunity to respect our sovereignty. They chose to ignore those warnings. They chose to attack our colonies. They killed our people. What would you have had us do? Welcome them? Negotiate while they destroyed our worlds? One of the council members, an elderly representative from a peaceful species, stood up. You could have shown mercy. You could have demonstrated that you are better than they are. Charles looked at her steadily. We showed the only kind of mercy that matters in this situation. We're letting survivors go home to tell the story. That is more mercy than they showed our colonists. And it serves a purpose. Now every species in this galaxy knows exactly where we stand. Our borders are real. Our warnings are real. Test us, and you will pay the price. The council erupted in argument, but Charles noticed that none of them actually threatened action against humanity. They were afraid, and fear was what would keep the peace. Part 4. The Message. The repaired Vexari cruiser left human space 3 days after the battle ended. Lieutenant Corvus stood on the bridge, now acting commander, since Zethus had been too injured to lead. He watched the human ships escort them to the boundary, making sure they left and did not try to gather intelligence on the way out. The journey home took 2 weeks. 2 weeks for Corvus to think about what he had seen, what he had learned. The tour through human space had changed something in him. He had seen their shipyards producing vessels at a rate that seemed impossible. He had seen their training centers where children learned tactics and strategy. He had seen their museums full of weapons and war, but more than that, he had seen their faces. The humans who escorted them were not cruel. They did not mock the Vexari or abuse them. They were professional, even respectful, but there was something in their eyes, a hardness that came from knowing exactly what they were capable of. When the Vexari cruiser finally arrived at the Empire's homeworld, the High Command was waiting. Corvus was brought before them immediately, still wearing his damaged armor, still carrying the weight of defeat. The council chamber was vast and filled with the Empire's most powerful leaders. The Emperor himself sat at the center, his scales dark with age, his eyes sharp with intelligence. He had ruled for 40 years and conquered 7 star systems personally before ascending to the throne. Report, the Emperor commanded. Corvus stood straight, despite his exhaustion. The invasion failed, Your Majesty. All 11 ships of the main fleet were destroyed. Only our vessel survived, and only because the humans chose to let us live. Silence filled the chamber. Finally, one of the council members spoke. You say they chose to let you live? They defeated our fleet and then showed mercy? It was not mercy, Corvus said. It was a message. They wanted us to come back and tell you what we saw. They wanted us to understand what we were facing. And what were you facing? The Emperor asked quietly. Corvus took a deep breath. A species that has been at war with itself for thousands of years. They nearly destroyed their own planet multiple times. They have weapons we cannot match and a culture built around conflict. War is not something they do, Your Majesty. War is what they are. He activated a data crystal he had been allowed to keep, and holographic images filled the chamber. The council watched footage of the battle, saw how quickly the human fleet had destroyed their ships. They saw the weapons, the tactics, the ruthless efficiency. But then Corvus showed them something else. The tours of human space, the shipyards, the training facilities, the museums full of humanity's bloody history. They showed us this deliberately, Corvus explained. They wanted us to understand that the fleet we faced was not their full strength. It was a fraction of what they could bring to bear. Admiral Cross told me that if we returned with 1,000 ships, they would destroy all of them. After seeing what I saw, I believe her. One of the military commanders stood up angrily. Are you saying we should fear these primitives? They have been in space for less than a century. They are not primitives, Corvus said firmly. That was our mistake. We judge them by how long they have traveled the stars. But they have been fighting wars since before recorded history. They know things about combat that we have never had to learn because we were always the strongest. They learn to fight by fighting each other, and they are very, very good at it. The Emperor was quiet for a long time, studying the images. Finally, he spoke. Commander Zethus recommended this invasion. Where is he? In the medical bay, Your Majesty. He took severe injuries during the boarding action. And what is your recommendation, Lieutenant Corvus? Corvus knew his answer would determine the Empire's response. It might even determine the fate of his entire species. We should stay away from human space. We should honor their boundaries and seek diplomatic relations if possible. But we should never ever challenge them militarily, not unless we are prepared to lose everything. The council erupted in arguments. Some called Corvus a coward. Others called him wise. The debate raged for hours. Finally, the Emperor raised his hand for silence. We will not launch a retaliatory strike, he announced. The cost would be too high and the gain too small. We will declare the invasion an unauthorized action by Commander Zethus. We will respect human boundaries going forward. It was a political solution, a way to save face. But Corvus knew the truth. The Empire was afraid, and they had good reason to be. News of the battle spread quickly through the galaxy. It traveled through diplomatic channels, through trade networks, through the rumors and stories that always followed conflict. Within a month, every major species knew what had happened at New Dakota. The reactions were mixed. Some species admired humanity's strength and decisiveness. Others were disturbed by the overwhelming response to what they saw as a relatively small incursion. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity was not to be tested. On Earth, Admiral Helen Cross faced questions about her actions. A formal inquiry was convened to determine if her response had been appropriate. She sat before a panel of senior officials and diplomats, answering their questions with patience. Did you consider a less aggressive response? One official asked. I considered every option, Helen replied, but only one option would prevent future incursions. The Vexari needed to learn that our boundaries are real. More importantly, every other species watching needed to learn that lesson too. But the destruction was total. You annihilated their fleet? Yes. Because anything less would have been seen as weakness. We are new to the galactic community. Other species see us as children because we have only been in space for 60 years. We needed to show them that we are not children. We are not weak, and we will defend ourselves with everything we have. Charles Wayne testified as well. He explained the political situation, the delicate balance humanity had to maintain. We are surrounded by species that have been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Many of them see us as inferior. If we had shown weakness, if we had negotiated or compromised, it would have invited more challenges. Admiral Cross's response was harsh, but it was necessary. Now we are seen as a major power. Now our borders are respected. The inquiry lasted 3 weeks. In the end, Admiral Cross was cleared of any wrongdoing. More than that, she was promoted. The officials understood what she had done and why. They might not have liked it, but they recognized its necessity. Jake Morrison returned to his farm on New Dakota. The colony was safe now, protected by a permanent military presence that had been established after the battle. He and Lisa tried to return to normal life, but normal felt different now. One evening, Sophie asked him about the battle. She was 16, old enough to understand but still young enough to see the world in simple terms. Dad, were we the good guys? Jake thought about that question. He thought about the Vexari crew he had helped capture, the ones who had survived. He thought about the ships he had helped destroy. The lives ended because they had crossed a boundary. I don't know if there are good guys and bad guys, he said finally. There are just people trying to protect their homes. We did what we had to do to keep you safe. Maybe that makes us good guys. Maybe it just makes us survivors. Lieutenant Amy Brooks was offered a promotion and a position at the military academy on Earth. She accepted, though she spent one last night on New Dakota before leaving. She stood at the memorial with Jake and Lisa, looking at the names carved in stone. Do you think it will happen again? She asked. Maybe, Jake said. But next time they'll think twice before crossing the border. That's what all of this was for, to make them think twice. In the Galactic Council chambers, humanity's status was formally elevated. They were recognized as a major power, given a permanent seat on the Security Council. Other species treated Charles Wayne with new respect, tinged with caution. One ambassador from a species that had been spacefaring for 5,000 years approached Charles privately. "Your species frightens us," she said bluntly. "You are so young, but you fight like ancient warriors." "We've had a lot of practice," Charles replied. "We spent most of our history fighting each other. We learned to make peace, but we never forgot the lessons of war." "Is there wisdom in that?" the ambassador asked. "Or just sadness?" Charles smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Maybe both. We hope we never have to fight again, but we're ready if we do." That's the message we wanted to send. Admiral Helen Cross stood on the observation deck of the Liberty's Hammer, looking out at Earth below. Her first officer joined her, a young woman named Patricia Grant, who had served with distinction during the battle. "Admiral, do you think we did the right thing?" Patricia asked. Helen was quiet for a moment. "I think we did the necessary thing. Right and wrong are complicated in war, but necessary is clear. We needed to protect our people. We needed to establish that our boundaries mean something. We did both. The cost was high, but the alternative would have been worse." "What was the alternative?" "More wars, more incursions, more colonies attacked because we were seen as weak. Sometimes you have to fight one terrible battle to prevent 100 smaller ones." "That's the choice I made." Patricia nodded slowly. "Do you think they'll really stay away? The Vexari and others?" 6 months after the battle at New Dakota, the galaxy had settled into a new normal. Humanity's borders were respected now, not out of friendship or diplomatic courtesy, but out of fear. The warning beacons at the edge of human space continued to broadcast their messages, but now everyone listened. Lieutenant Corvus had been promoted despite the defeat, or perhaps because of it. He had brought back valuable intelligence about humanity's true capabilities. He now served as an advisor to the Vexari High Command on human affairs. His job was simple: make sure the Empire never made the same mistake again. He stood in a briefing room, presenting to a group of young officers fresh from the academy. On the screen behind him was footage from the battle, the same footage that had changed the Empire's policy toward humanity. "What you are about to see," Corvus said, "is what happens when you underestimate an opponent. Commander Zethus, my former superior, made a critical error. He judged humanity by their age as a spacefaring species. He saw 60 years and assumed they were children. He was wrong." The footage played, showing the systematic destruction of the Vexari fleet. The young officers watched in silence, their confidence slowly crumbling as they realized how completely their forces had been defeated. "Humanity has been fighting wars for thousands of years," Corvus continued. "They have killed billions of their own kind in conflicts that span their entire history. When they reached space, they brought that experience with them. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the oldest or the wisest. But they are the most dangerous because they know exactly how to kill efficiently, and they are not afraid to do it." One young officer raised his hand. "Sir, are we simply going to avoid them forever? Should the Empire not seek revenge for our lost warriors?" Corvus fixed him with a hard stare. "Revenge is a luxury we cannot afford. The humans let us live specifically so we could deliver a message. That message was clear: stay away from their space or be destroyed. I recommend we listen to that message." The Vexari Empire had taken that advice. Trade routes were adjusted to avoid human territory. Military patrols gave their borders a wide margin. The incident was officially recorded as an unfortunate misunderstanding that had been resolved through appropriate channels. Everyone knew it was a polite fiction, but polite fiction sometimes prevented wars. On Earth, Charles Wayne prepared for another session of the Galactic Council. His role had changed significantly over the past months. Where before he had spent his time trying to convince other species to take humanity seriously, now he spent his time reassuring them that humanity was not planning to conquer the galaxy. His assistant, a young diplomat named Paul Griffin, helped him prepare the briefing materials. "The Toral Federation is requesting permission to establish a trade station near the border," Paul said. "They're being very careful about the wording. They want us to know they respect our sovereignty." "Approve it," Charles said. "But make sure they understand the rules. No military vessels. All ships must request authorization before crossing the border. Any violation will be treated as an act of war." "Aren't those terms a bit harsh for our allies?" Charles looked at him seriously. We don't have allies in the traditional sense. We have trading partners and species that respect our boundaries. The harsh terms are what keep the peace. If we make exceptions, others will expect exceptions. Better to have simple, clear rules that everyone follows. Paul nodded, still learning the delicate balance of galactic diplomacy. Sir, do you think the battle at New Dakota was worth it? The cost to our reputation, the fear others have of us now. Our reputation is exactly what we wanted, Charles said. Before New Dakota, we were seen as newcomers who could be pushed around. Now we're seen as a major power that defends its territory. Yes, some species fear us, but fear keeps them from testing us. It keeps our colonies safe. It keeps our people alive. So yes, it was worth it. Admiral Helen Cross had returned to her normal duties overseeing the ongoing expansion of humanity's defensive capabilities. But she had also become something else, a symbol. To some, she was a hero who had protected humanity from invasion. To others, she was a reminder of humanity's violent nature. She did not care much about either reputation. She cared about results. Patricia Grant, now a full captain, served as her chief of staff. Together, they reviewed the latest intelligence reports about other species' military capabilities. The battle at New Dakota had sent shockwaves through the military planning of every major power. Everyone was trying to figure out how humanity had achieved such a decisive victory. The Kalari Dominion has increased military spending by 30%, Patricia reported. They're developing new weapons specifically designed to counter our tactics. Good, Helen said. Let them spend their resources on preparations. As long as they're preparing to fight us, they're not actually fighting us. And the more they learn about our capabilities, the less likely they are to test us. You wanted them to be afraid. I wanted them to be smart. Fear makes people smart. It makes them think carefully before acting. The Vexari were not afraid, and it cost them 11 ships and thousands of lives. Now everyone is afraid and our borders are secure. Patricia hesitated before asking her next question. Admiral, do you ever regret it? The way we handled the situation? Helen looked out the window at the shipyard below, where new vessels were still being constructed at a steady pace. Every day, I think about the Vexari warriors who died. I think about our own people who died defending New Dakota. I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret the decision. Given the same circumstances, I would do it again. On New Dakota, life had returned to something approaching normal. The colony had grown since the battle, with new settlers arriving who wanted to be part of the place that had held the line. Jake Morrison had become something of a local celebrity, though he tried to avoid the attention. His farm was doing well. Sophie was preparing to go to university on Earth, planning to study engineering. Lisa had been elected to the Colonial Council. Life moved forward as it always did. But sometimes, on quiet nights, Jake would stand outside and look up at the stars. He would think about the battle, about the decisions he had made, about the people who had died under his command. Amy Brooks had written to him from the Academy on Earth. She was teaching now, training the next generation of defenders. She had asked him the same question Patricia had asked Admiral Cross. Was it worth it? Jake still did not have a good answer. He had done what he had to do. They had all done what they had to do. Humanity had drawn a line in the stars and defended it with blood and fire. The galaxy had learned to respect that line. Was it worth it? Maybe that was the wrong question. Maybe the right question was, what choice did they have? One evening, a ship arrived at New Dakota, carrying unexpected visitors. Admiral Helen Cross had come to see the colony she had saved, and she had brought Charles Wayne with her. They met with Jake and the other defenders at the memorial site. Helen stood before the stone with its 12 names carved into the surface. She was quiet for a long time before speaking. I never got to meet these people. I never got to thank them for buying us the time we needed. They did their duty, Jake said. Same as all of us. Their duty, Helen repeated. Is that what we call it? Dying to protect people they will never meet. Giving up their futures so others can have theirs. What else would you call it? Helen smiled sadly. Heroism. Sacrifice. The best of what humanity can be, even in the worst of times. Charles Wayne placed a memorial plaque at the base of the stone. It read, "They held the line." The line held. Humanity honors its defenders. That night, they held a dinner for the surviving defenders and the colonial leadership. The conversation was careful at first, but gradually warmed. Helen told stories about the assembly of the relief fleet, the mobilization that had brought 300 ships together in record time. Charles talked about the diplomatic aftermath, the carefully negotiated treaties and agreements that had followed. Sophie, Jake's daughter, asked Admiral Cross the question that many people wondered but few dared to ask. Would you really have destroyed 1,000 Vexari ships if they had come back? Helen looked at the young woman and saw in her the next generation, the ones who would inherit the galaxy humanity had fought to secure. Yes, and 10,000 if necessary. Our people are not expendable. Our sovereignty is not negotiable. That is the message we sent, and we will continue to send it for as long as necessary. But isn't there a better way? Couldn't we just talk to them, make them understand? We tried talking, Charles said gently. We posted warnings. We established clear rules. The Vexari chose to ignore them. Sometimes, unfortunately, the only language that works is force. We wish it were different, but wishing does not change reality. The evening ended with Admiral Cross and Charles Wayne preparing to leave. Before boarding their shuttle, Helen turned to Jake one last time. Captain Morrison, you and your people bought us the time we needed to respond. You held against impossible odds. The galaxy will remember the Battle of New Dakota, but I want you to know something personal. I will never forget what you did here. Jake shook her hand. We did what anyone would do. We defended our home.